He was only 7, but he worked like a grown man. At 9, he already knew the taste of hunger, the sting of cold, and the weight of being alone. By 12, he stopped crying, because he learned no one was coming to save him. This is the story of Thomas, a boy the world forgot, but one who never forgot what he deserved: to be loved, to be seen, to be saved. But life had other plans. It all started on a nameless dirt road, in a town people didn't talk about, where houses fell apart slowly, and dreams even faster. Thomas lived in a metal shack, crooked wood, rusty tin. No pictures on the walls, no smell of food, no laughter, just dust and silence. His mother, Clara, sang to him once, on his 3rd birthday. After that, never again. Alcohol took her, then grief, then everything else. Thomas was 5. He woke up early that morning, called her name. No answer. He shook her shoulder. Still nothing. That was the day he met death. No sirens, no screaming, just a still face, and the kind of silence that never leaves. His father, Peter, was still around, but not really. A man with slumped shoulders, empty eyes, breath that smelled like whiskey and regret. Peter didn't hit Thomas, but he didn't see him either. He'd sit for hours, staring at the wall, mumbling to no one, clutching a glass with shaking hands. Thomas tried everything. He drew pictures, cooked what little food they had, even sang the song his mother used to sing. Nothing worked. Peter stayed gone, even when he was right there. So Thomas grew up too soon. At 7, he walked miles alone to buy stale bread. He found coins under cushions, fixed leaking pipes with tape and wire, cooked with candle stubs, lived like he was already old. At school, he wore the same shirt every day. Kids laughed. Teachers avoided him. No one asked why. One day, a boy threw a rock at him. It hit his face. It bled. Thomas didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He just walked away. Every Thursday, after school, Thomas went to the junkyard, not to play, to build old wires, broken fans, rusty batteries. He didn't know how machines worked, not at first, but something inside him did. Machines made sense. People didn't. One day, he built a fan from scraps. Another day, a light that actually worked. No one saw it. No one cared. But in that junkyard, surrounded by things everyone else gave up on, he found peace. Now imagine this. You're 10 years old. Your house is falling apart. Your father doesn't speak. Your mother is gone. You cook. You clean. You survive. You walk through school like a ghost, smiling just enough to not draw attention. And at night, you sleep cold and hungry. Could you handle that? Would you survive? Thomas did. Not because he was strong, but because he had no other choice. Then came winter. A brutal one, the coldest in years. The gas ran out. So did the electricity. Even his homemade candle burned out. Thomas wrapped himself in a curtain, lay next to his silent father, and stared at the ceiling. His stomach ached. His fingers burned. His heart felt hollow. That night, he almost gave up. He thought maybe it's easier to just disappear. But then, something stirred inside him. It wasn't a voice. Not really, just a feeling. A whisper in the dark. Not yet. He didn't know what it meant, but he listened. And in that frozen night, Thomas made a silent promise: if I survive this, I'll make sure no child ever feels like this again. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't even a dream. It was a vow. One made without words, but with fire in his chest. When he turned 12, social workers showed up. His father was taken away. So was Thomas. They told him the shelter was safe, but it didn't feel safe. It felt sterile, like a clean prison. 5 boys to a room, scars in every stare. Thomas didn't talk much, but he watched, he listened, and slowly he realized something. He wasn't the only one. He wasn't the only kid who felt invisible, or unwanted, or broken. And maybe, just maybe, if he kept going, he could become someone who mattered, someone who helped. Can you believe all of this happened before he turned 13? Because when he hit 15, something changed. Someone showed up. Someone who saw him, really saw him, and that moment changed everything. The shelter was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that hums in your ears, that presses on your chest, that makes you forget what a real home sounds like. Thomas had been there for 3 months. Still no friends, still no visitors. Just the same cold hallway, the same metal bed, the same empty ceiling he stared at every night. He didn't cry. He didn't speak unless necessary. He just waited. For what, he wasn't sure. But something inside him refused to give up. Not yet. Most of the staff at the shelter were just doing their jobs. Efficient, polite, but distant. Then came Mr. Elliot. He wasn't like the others. He didn't wear a tie. He didn't carry a clipboard. He didn't rush through the halls like he was late for something more important. He walked slowly, looked people in the eye, and smiled like he meant it. The first time Thomas saw him, he thought he doesn't belong here. And he didn't. Elliot had kind eyes. The kind that saw more than clothes, behavior, or silence. The kind that noticed the weight someone was carrying, even when they pretended it wasn't there. He started visiting the shelter every Tuesday. Just once a week, he'd bring books, old radios, sometimes broken gadgets that needed fixing. At first, Thomas ignored him. Sat in the corner, back turned, head down. But Elliot didn't push, didn't ask questions, didn't act like he was trying to fix anything. He just kept showing up. One day, Elliot brought a broken fan. The blades were bent. The wiring was loose. He set it on the table and said casually, "I don't know how to fix this, but maybe someone here does." He didn't look at Thomas, but he left the fan on the table and walked away. Thomas didn't move for a long time, but later that night, he took it, not out of interest, but because it felt like a test, like a door someone forgot to lock. The next Tuesday, the fan was fixed, perfectly. Elliot didn't say anything, just smiled, and placed a small broken radio on the table. It became their ritual. No words, just problems and solutions. A fan, a lamp, a toaster, a small drone. Week by week, Thomas began to look forward to Tuesdays. But he didn't admit it, not even to himself. One afternoon, Elliot stayed behind after the other kids left. He sat across from Thomas, quietly, then slid a notebook across the table. "You're good at this," he said, "but I think you're better than just fixing what's broken." Thomas stared at the notebook. Blank pages, clean, waiting. He said nothing, but he didn't push it away either. Elliot stood and added, "Write down anything you want. Ideas, sketches, just something that's yours." Then he left. Thomas didn't touch the notebook for 3 days. Then one night, he opened it and started drawing. By month 5, Elliot had become part of the place, but not like the others. He didn't give orders. He listened. He remembered names, brought second helpings, laughed like he hadn't forgotten how. Thomas still didn't talk much, but he started nodding, then mumbling, and asking small things. "What's this tool for? Can I try soldering next time?" Each question, a step, each word, a risk. And Elliot never made it weird, never praised too much, never acted surprised. He just responded, naturally, like Thomas had always been speaking. One rainy evening, a storm hit the town. Power flickered. Lights went out in half the shelter. Staff scrambled. Kids panicked. But Thomas didn't. He walked straight to the storage closet, grabbed the backup light kit he had built last month, and within 5 minutes, the hallway lights were back. Emergency powered, stable, efficient. Everyone stared. One of the staff whispered, "How did he even know how to do that?" Elliot just smiled and said, "Because he's not just some broken kid, he's an engineer in the making." Later that night, Thomas sat alone in the common room. The lights hummed quietly. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Elliot walked in with 2 mugs of hot cocoa, sat beside him, and said nothing, just silence, the good kind. Then Elliot asked softly, "Has anyone ever told you that you don't have to stay invisible?" Thomas looked at him, not angry, not afraid, just tired. "People don't see what they don't want to," he said. Elliot nodded. "Maybe. But sometimes people just need help knowing where to look." A week later, Elliot invited Thomas to visit his workshop, a real one. Not a classroom, not a shelter, a converted garage. With tools, shelves, soldering stations, wires, and projects everywhere. Thomas hesitated, but curiosity won. The first time he walked into that space, he froze. It smelled like metal and wood and electricity, and it felt like home. Not like a place to sleep, but a place to build. A place where he wasn't just tolerated, he was needed. They started meeting every Saturday, fixing things, building things, sometimes just taking things apart to understand how they worked. One day, Elliot handed him a circuit board and said, "Let's make something new this time." Thomas blinked. "What?" "Not a repair, an invention. Something that never existed before." Thomas had never thought of that. His whole life was about fixing, surviving, restoring, creating. That was different. That was bold. He looked down at the board and imagined. Over the next few weeks, Thomas built his first original project. It was a small device that combined solar charging, LED lighting, and a heat sensor. Simple, but efficient. He called it Luma. Elliot asked why. Thomas shrugged, "Because it gives light when everything else is dark." Elliot smiled, "Just like you." Thomas looked away, but for the first time in years, he smiled too. Word got around. One of the counselors asked Thomas to help fix the sound system. Another wanted him to speak to a younger boy who refused to eat. Thomas didn't want to be anyone's hero, but he showed up. And slowly, he stopped feeling like just a survivor. He started feeling capable, like maybe his life could mean something. Then came the invitation. Elliot brought in a flyer one morning. Youth Innovation Fair. Open to students aged 14-17. Submit your invention. Tell your story. Be seen. Thomas read it twice, and again. He shook his head. No one wants to hear from a shelter kid. Elliot replied calmly, "Then maybe it's time they do." The deadline was in 2 weeks. Thomas worked every night. He tweaked the design, redrew the schematics, practiced explaining how it worked. He wasn't used to being heard, but the thought of someone listening was terrifying and exciting. He didn't tell anyone else, didn't ask for help. But Elliot stayed nearby. Quiet support, present, ready. Submission day came. Thomas stood at the entrance of the community center, holding Luma in his hands, heart pounding. Elliot stood beside him, didn't push, just waited. "You ready?" he asked. Thomas took a breath. "I think so." They stepped inside, and for the first time in his life, Thomas wasn't just another forgotten kid. He was the one with the invention, the one with the notebook, the one who built light in the dark. And this was just the beginning. Thomas had never been on a stage before. Not once, not even to speak. But here he was, frozen under a spotlight, a guitar in his hands, and dozens of eyes staring back. His palms were sweating, his throat dry, his legs, they barely remembered how to stand. No applause, no encouragement, just silence, the kind that waits for you to fail. It had started 4 days earlier. Miss Anne walked into class with a poster in her hand. Bright red letters, bold font. Talent night this Friday. Sing, dance, speak, be heard. Most kids rolled their eyes. Others whispered ideas. I'm doing a rap. I'll play drums. I'm just going to watch them embarrass themselves. Thomas sat quietly, invisible as usual. But Anne saw him. Like always, she stopped at his desk, lowered her voice. You ever think of singing one of your songs? Thomas blinked. Songs? He never told her he wrote them. But maybe. She knew anyway. That night, he stared at a blank page. No music, no words. Just silence and shadows. He wasn't writing for applause. Not for fame. Not even for attention. He wrote because he had to. Because something inside him refused to stay quiet anymore. So he scribbled, erased, started again, until finally the lyrics came. Not pretty, not polished, but raw, real, his. The next morning, Anne found him before class. He handed her the paper. No words. She read it slowly, quietly, line by line. When she finished, she looked up. You need to perform this. Thomas shook his head. They'll laugh. They'll talk. They don't even know my name. Anne smiled softly. Maybe not, but maybe it's time they do. By Thursday, he had memorized every word, every line, every pause. He borrowed a cracked guitar from the music room, retuned it, practiced until his fingers hurt. But still, he wasn't ready. How could you be ready to pour your heart out in front of people who never cared if it was broken? Friday arrived too fast. The auditorium was packed. Students, parents, teachers, loud chatter, flashing phones, endless noise. Backstage, Thomas waited in the corner. He was sixth in line. The girl before him did a tick-tock dance. Screams, cheers, laughter. Then someone called next up Thomas Silva. Wrong name. Didn't matter. He walked out anyway. One step, another. Up to the mic. He couldn't see the crowd. Only light. And shapes. He took a deep breath, strummed the first chord, and sang. The room went quiet. Not because it was good. Not yet. Because it was different. He sang about a missing mother. An absent father, about sleeping cold, walking alone, wishing someone, anyone, would notice. His voice cracked. But he didn't stop. By the second verse, the laughter had stopped. The phones were lowered. Even the loudest students just listened. Because what they heard wasn't a performance. It was pain, turned into melody. A boy with no home, no backup, no stage name, was telling their story too. When he finished, he didn't bow, didn't smile. He just stepped back. 1 second passed. Then another. Then applause. Real applause. Not forced, not polite, not charity. Real. Miss Anne stood. Some teachers followed. And in the back row, a stranger was watching. Not clapping, just smiling. Backstage, no one said much. Some nodded. A few gave thumbs up. But Thomas didn't need their words. He had already heard what mattered. Silence. The kind that listens, not judges. He walked home that night with his head up. The stars felt closer. The streets less heavy. That night, he wrote another song. Not about loss, but about courage. About standing. about speaking, about a spark that refuses to die. The next day, he was called to the main office, confused, nervous. Inside, a man in a brown blazer waited. Mid-40s, friendly eyes. "Thomas?" He nodded. "I'm Marcus Vidal. I run a youth music foundation. We help young voices be heard, especially ones the world usually ignores." Thomas said nothing. Marcus smiled. "I saw your performance. You didn't just sing. You told the truth, and that takes guts." He handed Thomas a card. "Next week, we're holding auditions. No pressure, but I think you should come." Thomas stared at the card that night. It didn't look magical, just paper, ink. But in his hand, it felt like a key, a door, a way out, or maybe a way in. He showed it to Elliot the next day. The man just nodded. "You should go." Thomas hesitated. "What if I fail?" Elliot didn't blink. "Then you fail, and you try again. But this time, someone will hear you." That weekend, Thomas prepared. He sang. He rewrote. He practiced with fire in his chest. The fear didn't go away. But now, it wasn't alone. Hope had joined it. The night before the audition, he couldn't sleep. He looked out the window, held the card in his hand, and whispered, "Don't let them break me again." Then he tucked the card under his pillow, and finally slept. In the morning, he dressed in his best clothes. They didn't fit well, didn't matter. He carried the guitar, the lyrics, and a quiet fire in his chest. Elliot drove him. Didn't say much. At the door, he paused. "You ready?" Elliot asked. Thomas looked forward, and for the first time in a long time, he said yes. Bright, wide, empty chairs in front of a small stage. 3 judges, 2 women, 1 man. None of them smiled. Thomas walked to the center, placed his guitar down, cleared his throat. 1 judge looked up. "Whenever you're ready." That was it. No warm welcome, no handshake. Just go. He sat, took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and began. His fingers trembled on the first chord. The strings felt foreign, wrong, but the melody came. Rough, honest. The air smelled like dust and old carpet. Thomas sat in the hallway. 3rd chair from the left, guitar on his lap, lyrics in his hand, heartbeat in his throat. It was almost time. The new Voice Foundation auditions had brought kids from all over. Polished shoes, trained voices, perfect posture. Thomas wore a faded hoodie, frayed jeans, and shoes a size too small. He looked nothing like the others, and he felt even less. The hallway echoed with nervous humming. Scales, warm-ups, the sound of confidence rehearsed over years. Thomas said nothing. He didn't hum, didn't sing. He just waited. Still, quiet, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. This meant everything. A door opened. A tall man with a clipboard stepped out. Thomas Silva? He stood slowly, legs like iron, hands ice cold. He followed the man down the hallway, past doors, past lights, past other kids who didn't even look up. Then a room. He sang about fear, about nights with no power, days with no voice, a boy trying to feel something other than invisible. He didn't sing for approval. He sang because he had to, because silence had taken enough from him. When it ended, he looked up. The judges said nothing. No whisper, no nod. Just a few notes scribbled on paper. The tall man said, "Thank you, Thomas. We'll be in touch." That was it. He left the room with his heart heavier than when he came in. Outside, Elliot was waiting. One look at Thomas said everything. "How do you feel?" Thomas shrugged. "I sang, but I don't know if they heard me." Elliot placed a hand on his shoulder. Doesn't matter. You did. That night, Thomas didn't eat. Didn't write. Didn't sing. He just stared at the ceiling. Not angry. Not scared. Just empty. Like maybe the spark was gone. Or maybe it was never real to begin with. 2 days passed. No call, no message. Just silence. Thomas avoided Anne. Didn't show up at Elliot's workshop. Didn't answer when kids at the shelter asked how it went. He told himself it was stupid to believe. Then, on the third night, a letter arrived. Plain envelope. No name on the front. Inside, Thomas, you are invited to the new Voice Youth Showcase. Top 10 finalists. 1 live performance. 1 shot to be heard. See you Friday. He read it twice. Then again. His hands shook. Finalist? Him? Elliot smiled when Thomas showed him. I knew it. Thomas still couldn't believe it. But they didn't clap. They didn't say anything. Elliot nodded. Sometimes the people who say the least are the ones really listening. Friday came fast. The showcase was held in a real venue. A small city theater with velvet curtains, a proper sound system, stage lights, real programs. Thomas looked around backstage. Other kids were stretching, breathing, vocalizing. He stood in the corner, still, focused. He wasn't nervous. He was ready, or so he thought. One of the performers leaned over. You're the shelter kid, right? Thomas didn't respond. Another laughed. Didn't know they let charity cases in. Still no reaction. But inside? A storm. He almost walked away. Almost. But then he remembered he didn't come for them. He came for the kid inside him who never got to speak. His name was called Spotlight. Silence. He stepped forward, tuned the guitar, took a breath, and began. This song was different. Not about pain, not about fear, but about standing up, about becoming louder than the voices that tried to silence him, about turning the echo of trauma into something musical, something that made people stop, look, feel. His voice shook, but only at first. By the second verse, he owned the stage, the lights, the moment, the spark. It was fire now. The song ended. Silence again. Then applause. Loud, real, rising. Some stood. Others wiped their eyes. But none turned away. He walked off stage lighter. Anne hugged him tight. Elliot nodded proudly. You didn't just sing, he said. You spoke for every kid who never got the chance. Thomas smiled. It felt strange. But right. He had found something more than music. He had found voice. Later that night, he sat alone, back at the shelter, notebook open. He wrote 1 line. This time they listened, then closed the notebook, and slept peacefully. It arrived on a Thursday, just after breakfast, just before doubt had time to creep in again. A plain white envelope. No return address. No markings. Just his name. Thomas. Nothing else. He almost threw it away. Junk mail, probably. Or worse pity. But something about it stopped him. He opened it. Carefully. Slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Lined. Folded. Torn from an old notebook. The handwriting? Shaky, uneven, but familiar. Son, I know. I don't have the right to call you that. But I didn't know what else to write. It's been years. You probably hate me. Maybe you should. I don't have excuses. I left. I failed. I drank when I should have protected you. I heard about your song, the showcase. I don't know how. Word got around. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. I always was. Even when I couldn't show it. You became everything I wasn't. And more. If you ever want to talk, or not, This is my number. I love you. Dad Thomas sat on the edge of his bed, letter in hand, breath shallow. He read it again, then again. Part of him wanted to rip it, burn it, forget it. But he didn't. He folded it back, gently, carefully, and placed it in the notebook. The one Elliot gave him. The one full of blueprints and songs. That night he didn't sleep. Not really. He just stared at the ceiling, remembering the yelling, the slamming doors. The night spent hiding in closets while glass broke downstairs. And also, a different memory, small, faded, a man humming in the kitchen, a lullaby, hands guiding his on a toy piano, just once, but real. He didn't tell anyone about the letter, not Anne, not Elliot, not even the caseworker. It felt sacred, not because it was good, but because it was true, messy, late, but true. The next morning, he walked to the shelter's courtyard, sat on the same bench he always did, notebook open, blank page, and he wrote, not a song, not a plan, just a message. You left, I bled, you forgot, I survived, and now I sing, not for you, not against you, for me. He closed the notebook, breathed in, exhaled slow. That weekend, he went back to Elliot's workshop. First time in days, Elliot was at the workbench, fixing a small speaker. He looked up, nodded. You okay? Thomas shrugged, then pulled out the letter, said nothing, just handed it over. Elliot read it, silently, respectfully. When he finished, he handed it back. You want to talk about it? Thomas shook his head. Elliot nodded again. Then let's get to work. For the next hour, they said nothing, just soldered, measured, tuned circuits. And somehow, it helped. The next few weeks moved fast. Thomas was invited to speak at a youth event. Not sing. Speak. They wanted him to tell his story. At first, he said no. He wasn't a speaker. He wasn't polished. He didn't like attention. But Anne encouraged him. You don't have to be perfect, she said. You just have to be honest. The night of the event, he stood backstage. Same fear, same nerves, but a different voice inside. Not saying you'll fail, now whispering they need this. He stepped out, microphone in hand, heartbeat steady, and spoke. About the shelter, about silence, about Elliot, about songs born from pain. He didn't cry, didn't fake anything. He just told the truth. And when he finished, a standing ovation, not for the performance, for the courage. Afterward, a boy about 10 years old walked up, tears in his eyes. My dad left too, he said, and I thought I was the only one. Thomas kneeled, met his eyes. You're not, and you never were. That moment, it changed something, not just in the boy, in Thomas. He finally saw himself, not as broken, not as abandoned, but as someone who made it through. That night, he took the letter out again. This time, he called the number. 1 ring, 2, then voicemail. He didn't leave a message. Just listened to the sound of his father's voice one more time, and hung up. It was enough. He didn't call again, but he didn't tear up the letter either. He kept it, folded, tucked inside the back of his notebook. Not because he forgave, not because it was fixed, but because it was real. The boy sat alone, far corner of the room, hood up, eyes down, shoulders tense. Thomas recognized it instantly. The silence, the stillness, the signal that said, don't talk to me. I won't talk to you. He had been that boy once, not long ago. Elliot waved him over. That's Jaden, he said. New at the shelter. Been through some things. Thomas nodded. I can tell. Elliot looked at him carefully. I thought maybe you could show him around. Just a few minutes. Thomas hesitated. He wasn't sure he was ready to be anyone's guide. He still felt like he was figuring things out himself. But he said yes, because someone once said yes to him. He walked over slowly. Jaden didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept staring at the floor. Thomas sat in the chair across from him. No pressure, no questions, just presence. After a few quiet moments, he said, I used to sit there too. Same chair, same hoodie, same silence. No response. That one squeaks when you lean back. You'll find out eventually. Still nothing. Thomas smiled anyway, and stayed. They didn't talk that day. Not really. Jaden barely looked at him. But when Thomas got up to leave, Jaden shifted. A small motion, barely visible, but enough. The next time, Thomas brought a small speaker. Broken, dusty, set it on the table between them. I could fix this, he said. But I thought maybe you'd want to help. Jaden didn't answer, but he leaned forward, just a little. That was the beginning. Over the next few days, they worked side by side. No deep conversations, no dramatic breakthroughs. Just work. Wires, screws, tools, and silence that wasn't heavy anymore. Just shared. One afternoon, Thomas asked, You like music? Jaden shrugged. Used to. Thomas nodded. Me too. Pause. Jaden looked up finally. What kind? Thomas smiled. The kind that keeps you from disappearing. Later that week, Thomas brought his guitar. Started playing softly while Jaden sorted wires. Jaden didn't speak, but his foot tapped once, then twice. Thomas saw it. Didn't say anything, just kept playing. Then something happened. Jaden picked up the notebook, the one Thomas always kept nearby. He flipped through a few pages, stopped at a lyric. Read it out loud. You wrote this? Thomas nodded. Jaden looked down again. Voice quiet. It's not bad. Coming from a boy who barely spoke, it was everything. They started writing together. Not songs at first, just lines. Thoughts. Half-finished ideas. Jaden's handwriting was messy. His grammar off, but his words? Sharp, honest, real. Thomas saw himself again, and something else potential. One day, Jaden asked, You ever perform? Thomas chuckled. Once or twice. Jaden squinted. You ever mess up? Thomas laughed. Every single time? Jaden smiled. First time. A real one. The bond grew. They fixed a lamp, a drone, an old radio. They wrote lyrics about storms, about hunger, about hope. Jaden started coming early, staying late. The boy who once sat silent in the corner now showed up with ideas. Then came the moment. Elliot walked in one afternoon holding a flyer. Youth Talent Showcase Shelter Edition. Open mic night, he said. Just for the kids here. No pressure. Jaden shook his head immediately. No way. Thomas looked at him. Okay, but why not? Jaden stared at the floor. People laugh. They always do. Thomas leaned forward. So let them laugh. You sing anyway. They didn't talk about it again for 2 days. But Thomas knew the seed had been planted. Late Thursday evening, Jaden asked, If I did it, would you go up with me? Thomas smiled. Of course. Friday night. The room was small. Dim lights. Dozens of folding chairs. A microphone stand that leaned to the left. The crowd? Kids, staff, no parents. But it mattered anyway. Jaden stood by the door, frozen. Thomas stood beside him. You don't have to be loud. You just have to be true. Jaden breathed in, then out, and walked forward. They stood side by side, 2 chairs, 1 guitar, 1 notebook. Thomas started the chords. Jaden read the first line. His voice cracked. But he kept going. Second line, third. Something changed. Not in the room. In him. He stopped reading. Started remembering. The words became his. At the end, silence. Then claps. Not many, but real. Jaden didn't smile. Not yet. But he didn't run. Didn't hide. He stood there. And Thomas knew. That moment would stay with him forever. Back in the hallway, Jaden said, "I didn't think I could do that." Thomas replied, "Neither did I." Until I did. Later, Elliot pulled Thomas aside. "You did good." Thomas shook his head. "He did good." Elliot smiled. "You both did." That night, Thomas wrote one more line in his notebook. Helping someone else stand makes you stand taller too. He closed the book, turned off the light, and slept deeply. No regrets, no weight, just peace. Thomas sat at the edge of the old workbench. Same spot. Same smell of solder and dust. But something felt different. This wasn't about fixing things anymore, or even surviving. It was about building, for the first time in his life. He had something to offer. Jaden wasn't the only one. After the talent night, other kids started showing up. Quiet at first. Curious. "Can I help with the drone? Do you still write lyrics? Do you think I could try?" Thomas didn't have all the answers, but he had space. And that was enough. Elliot noticed the shift. "You're leading something now," he said, "even if you don't mean to." Thomas shook his head. "I'm not a leader." Elliot smiled. Leaders don't decide to lead. They just go first. So Thomas made a plan. Not for a song, not for a solo, but for a workshop. A real one. For kids like him, broken, brilliant, invisible. He called it the Quiet Sparks. He asked for an old storage room at the shelter. Nobody was using it. Just boxes, dust, neglect. Perfect. He cleaned it out, wiped the tables, labeled the tools, hung sketches on the wall. He brought his notebooks, his guitar, a few broken electronics. Then he made a sign, "Not here to impress, here to express." At first, it was just Jaden, then 2 others, then 5. Some came to write, some to build, some just to sit in silence. All were welcome. No questions, no judgment, just room to exist, and slowly, to become. Word spread. Other shelters called. Community centers asked. Thomas was invited to speak again, but this time, he didn't tell his story. He told theirs. The kids who never raised their hands, who spoke through wires, or rhythm, or sketches on napkins, and the world started listening. One day, Anne stopped by. First time she saw the new space. She walked slowly, touched the edge of a circuit board, watched 2 boys quietly rewrite a song together. When she looked at Thomas, her eyes were glassy. "You built something no one else could." Thomas smiled. "I just gave them what you gave me." The local paper did a story, and a blog, and a podcast. Suddenly, donations came in. Old laptops, instruments, tools. The room doubled in size. Elliot installed shelves. Jaden helped design the new layout. Thomas oversaw everything, but not as a boss, as a builder. Then came the email. Big logo, official tone. Youth Innovation Fund finalist. Selected for prototype funding and mentorship. They had seen his solar-powered safety light Luma, the design he built 2 years ago. Now, they wanted to fund its development, if he could present it, in person, to a panel. In 3 weeks, Thomas froze. This wasn't a shelter showcase, or a dusty hallway performance. This was real, big, terrifying. He told Elliot, "I'm not ready." Elliot looked at him calmly. "Neither were you the first time you sang. or mentored, or stood on stage. But you did it anyway. Thomas looked down. What if I fail? Elliot placed a hand on his shoulder. Then fail, loudly, with heart. The next morning, Thomas opened his notebook, sketched out new improvements to Luma. He wanted it smaller, more durable, brighter, and he wanted it made by the kids in the workshop. Together, they called it Luma 2.0, built in silence. The 3 weeks were chaos, late nights, solder burns, missed meals, but laughter, too, and purpose. The kids weren't just helping. They were invested. This was theirs, too. Presentation day, Thomas wore a button-up shirt. Didn't fit right. Jaden handed him the prototype. The others clapped once. Quiet, but proud, and drove him. Elliot waited at the venue. The panel sat behind long tables. Tech investors, educators, people who never knew boys like Thomas. Until now, he spoke clearly, not fast, not desperate. He told them about darkness, about shelters, about sparks that no one sees, and how Luma wasn't just light. It was a symbol of what happens when you stop trying to fix people and start helping them build. Silence, then questions. Technical, tough. He answered all of them, not perfectly, but honestly. And when it was over, one judge leaned forward. You built this with kids from a shelter? Thomas nodded. With kids who were never supposed to shine, but do anyway. A week later, the call came. They were in. Grant approved. Mentorship secured. Production partnership offered. Thomas couldn't believe it, but the others could. They had seen it coming all along. They held a small celebration in the workshop. Nothing fancy, just music, laughter, leftover cupcakes. Jaden handed Thomas a folded paper. Inside, thanks for not fixing me. Thanks for showing me how to build. Thomas didn't speak. He just pulled him into a hug. And for the first time in his life, he felt like a man. Not because he had power, but because he had helped someone else find theirs. Later that night, he stood alone in the empty room. Light dim, notebook in hand. He wrote one last line. What we build builds us back. He turned off the light, locked the door, and walked out. Not alone, not afraid, but ready. He sat alone, back in the same chair, same notebook, same quiet room. Years had passed, but the silence still knew his name. Only now, it didn't own him. Thomas opened the first page, the one where everything began. Sketches, lyrics, scribbled pain. Then turned to the last one, blank, waiting. He took a breath, picked up the pen, and wrote to the boy I used to be. You probably don't know how to start this letter. That's okay. I didn't either. You're alone right now. I know that. You hear the yelling downstairs. You feel the cold where love should have been. You think no one sees you. And worse, you believe they're right not to. You carry silence like a second skin, like armor. But underneath, you're still soft. And that's not weakness. It's proof. Proof that after everything you still feel, still dream, still hope. That is your superpower. I wish I could tell you things get easier. They don't. But you get stronger. You'll meet people who don't just see you. They choose you. A teacher who hears your voice before you ever speak. A mentor who hands you broken things just so you can realize you know how to fix them. And one day, a boy just like you will walk into your life. Quiet, hurt, hiding, and without realizing, you'll become the person you needed back then. You'll hold space for him. Teach him how to write his truth. Sing his sorrow. Build his own light. And in doing that, you'll save yourself too. You'll learn that healing isn't a straight line. It loops, flares up, fades, returns. But every time, you'll have more tools. You'll know what to do. One day, you'll stand in a room full of kids who feel like shadows. And you'll tell them I used to disappear too, but not anymore. They'll believe you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real, raw, open. You'll sing in places where you once sat in silence. You'll build things no one expected from you. And you'll write songs, not about what hurt, but about what survived, about what bloomed after the fire. I wish I could hug you now. You've carried so much, too soon, too alone. But look, you made it. You didn't let the world keep you small. You didn't let the voices win. You learned to speak louder. And more importantly, you taught others how to speak too. That is legacy. That is light. So if you're reading this in the dark, hold on. The sun is coming. And when it rises, you'll recognize the warmth because it'll be coming from you. Thomas closed the notebook, placed the pen on top, stood up slowly. He wasn't that boy anymore, but he would always carry him, protect him, honor him, by living, fully, bravely, loudly. Outside, kids waited in the workshop. Laughter echoed down the hall. Someone played 3 chords on a keyboard. Off key. But with heart, Thomas smiled and walked toward the sound. Not to escape the past, but to bring it with him. He wasn't just healed, he was whole. And finally, he was home. Thomas walked out of the room, not as a survivor, but as a builder of light. He didn't need applause anymore. He didn't need to be seen to know his worth. Because now every spark he lit in someone else reflected back into him. And in a world that once ignored him, he became the echo, the proof that even the quietest boy can grow into a voice that moves the world.